All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nichol. And today we are going to do a winter hunting gear Q&A episode. Got an unbelievable number of questions. So I'm going to do the best I can to get through as many of these as I can. Also, this one is going to be uploaded to YouTube and the audio version of the podcast. I'm probably going to be showing some things on screen, products and other things that I'm talking about. There's a lot of product specific questions in here. So if you want the visual experience as well, I recommend heading on over to YouTube. Little bit of housekeeping. I just put up my compact spotter review where I did an in-depth comparison of the Swarovski ATC, the Kawa TSN 55, and the Vortex Compact Razor 13 to 39. Put a lot of time and effort into that video. I think it's super useful for anybody considering one of those optics. So head on over to YouTube and check it out. I still have 2 giveaways live right now. You can win the Prime RVX 34 compound bow. All you need to do to enter that is purchase a subscription to Mindful Reviews between now and December 15th. So mindful-reviews.com. Also, my review of that bow is live on YouTube, so you can head on over. Sorry, my cat is being a dick. I also currently have 2 giveaways that are live. You can win a Prime RVX 34 by getting a membership over at Mindful Reviews anytime before December 15th. I also posted my review of that bow over on YouTube, so if you want some more in-depth information, go over there and check it out. Second giveaway is for a Frontiersman Volpe's processing knife. I did a review comparing that against the Argali Sawtooth. That one's only open until the end of this week. So if you head on over to the YouTube review, it will tell you how to enter. Basically, social media giveaways, so like, comment, share, all that good stuff. And one final note of housekeeping, Mindful Hunter outfitting. So I finished up an incredible season of guiding this year and was able to take 5 animals with our clients. I got an elk, a bull elk, 2 bull moose, and 2 mule deer bucks. The 2 mule deer bucks were both with trad guys, one at 4 yards and one at 10 yards. Crazy season. So if you are interested in archery mule deer hunts in Alberta, let me know, or spring, bear, any weapon hunts in British Columbia. I'm offering both those right now. I'm actually working on another offering as well, which I'll keep you guys in the loop with. But shoot me an email, jay@mindfulhunter.com. I would love to help you plan your next Canadian hunting adventure. All right. I'm going to dive right into this head first, and I'm going to try and crank them out as quickly as possible to keep this very tactical. What tent stoves have you used before, and which has been your favorite? So personally, I have had a Kafaru Smith cylinder stove, a Seek Outside XL. I think it used to be called the Big Mama XL. Those guys are so woke. They probably had to take Big Mama out of the title. And then I've used a couple other kind of like a no-name box stove and then one of the older Kafaru box stoves. I will be honest, there's very little functional difference between any of these stoves. They're all kind of a pain in the ass to put together. You're going to get dirty hands and probably little paper cuts from the Tim chimneys in all of them. I'd like to run the new Argali. You know, everybody's kind of losing their shit over the Peaks. I have a tough time with Peaks due to how aggressively they market everything. And I don't really see a large functional difference between these stoves. I would think about the size that you want, and then I would look for one that is competitively priced. And as long as you're getting it from a reputable supplier, I thought the Seek stove was very good. These Argali ones look very good. I don't think it really matters that much. I don't think there's a big difference in a lot of these stoves. Do you ever bring a carbon monoxide sensor when using a hot tent? No, I don't. Tents are not airtight. There's lots of places that air is getting in and out, and normally you have a chimney in a hot tent, so air is kind of flowing pretty freely. I don't worry about it. Now, when you sleep in the back of your truck, if you got all the windows closed and you're using like one of those Mr. Buddy heaters, which I do on occasion, I recommend cracking a window of some kind. And most of those units also have built-in carbon monoxide detectors. I've had my heater shut off multiple times in the back of my truck, and it's because it got, past the limit of what the sensor would allow. So I do recommend using one if you're in the back of the truck. Jacob asks, thoughts on Sitka's new Hyper Down system? I don't know much about it. I've kind of gone back and forth on down. I'm using more down insulation layers now than I was before. I don't know what their claims are with Hyper Down, whether they've integrated some synthetic with it, whether they've water treated it, or kind of what it is. But as of right now, I can't really comment because I don't know that much about it. Now, the next question, best electric socks you've used. I'm gonna share my screen here. Hang on a second. And it's not even socks, it's insoles. So there's a company called Motion Heat. They're out of Alberta. The URL is motionheat.ca. And they make a pair of heated insoles. I bought the do-it-yourself kit right here. I'll share this one because this is the entire kit. $225 Canadian for the entire kit. Comes with 2 insoles, 2 heating elements, all the batteries, the calf straps, chargers, everything that you need. It's $225. I've used these on multiple late season whitetail hunts. I super impressed with these things. This is what I would recommend. If you're going to be sitting around all day and you're worried about having cold feet, I would go with a high-end heated insole. Some of these cheaper socks look like they could be decent, but when it comes to like wrapping my body in electric components, I would rather go quality over quantity. So yeah, this is what I recommend here. And on that note, the other heated gear that I tried and was very impressed with was the Numa Heated Core base layer line. So let's check that out right now. So they have base layers. They have a long sleeve heated core top, heated vest, and heated pants. They're like long johns, and they've got a heated muff as well for your hands. I liked the long sleeve shirt. It had heating elements on the front and the back. I liked that it kind of had the, down by where your kidneys and liver are on the back, and then up near your traps. I really enjoyed that. Now, the pants just had them on the front of the thighs and the upper back, and I kind of wish it had more heating elements, like down on the back of the calves and some other part. But I was quite impressed with both the long sleeve shirt and the long john. So I can recommend that heated gear quite strongly. I also have a review of that on YouTube if you're looking for more information. Small item, but important. Heat pads. I'm afraid I don't know what you mean by heat pads, so we're going to have to skip that question. Water treatment solutions in freezing conditions. Filters freeze. Yeah, I mean, I've been a Sterapen guy straight for the last 6 years. I don't even own a filter. I don't understand why everybody's so fascinated with filters. Like, there's the argument, I guess, that you're going to get out sediment. You're not really going to change flavor profile. You might change the way water looks, but you're not functionally changing what it tastes like. So I use a Sterapen. Now, I will say winter water is a much easier thing to come by than it is in the summer because there's snow everywhere. And if I'm melting fresh fallen snow, I do not sterilize that at all. And in fact, I've kind of gone back to not doing as much sterilization as I used to. And I know I'm going to get flamed for this, and everybody's going to say, oh, you're telling everybody not to sterilize their water. Everybody's going to get Giardia. I worked in forestry in British Columbia for 15 years. I took an empty Nalgene to work every single day, and I would just fill it up as creeks as I walked past them. We didn't even know what sterilization was. Didn't own a filter, didn't own a SteriPen. In 15 years, I did not sterilize a single drop of water. Only ever got sick once, and that was because in the fall, I drank water directly out of a river that had spawning salmon in it. And literally like dead salmon carcasses were just floating by. And so, yeah, I was shitting through the eye of a needle for about 3 days, but I went to work every day and I was just fine. I just felt like shit. I've never had a problem. Now, this is in BC. You're up in the mountains. They're flowing creeks or springs. I mean, obviously I've seen water that I would not drink without sterilizing it downstream from, beaver dams and all the rest of it. But I think for the most part, the whole sterilization craze is a little bit overblown. I think it's very important you have the ability to sterilize water, but also I think common sense needs to play a role here. Like, think about the water and instead of saying I can drink anything as long as I sterilize it, have a little think about what kind of water you're going to be drinking, and is there better sources that you don't have to be as worried about. So I was a whole bunch of stuff I didn't sterilize this year, and I was just fine. But the two answers to this question are the SteriPen, and I want to show you the new SteriPen that I just started using and why I recommend it more strongly for everybody. But to get back to my point, sorry, accepting all the cookies. Yeah, this is the one that I use now, the SteriPen Ultra. This is USB chargeable and has a digital readout, and I much prefer this version over the Adventurer that I was using previously. It's a little bit bigger, but the fact that it's USB chargeable is just a game changer, because packing around a spare weird battery for the old one was a pain in the ass. But takeaway here, SteriPen in the winter, and if I'm melting snow, I don't need to worry about sterilizing it. However, and I know there's some stove questions here later on, so I'm not going to dive down this rabbit hole just yet, but you will need to take more fuel with you if you plan on melting snow for your water. It takes a lot of fuel to melt snow, way more than you think it would. Recommendations for some synthetic sleeping bags, not quilts, that are really good. As I mentioned before, I am a big fan of Enlightened Equipment, and Enlightened Equipment also makes sleeping bags, not just quilts. They're the only ones that I've had those, and I've had a Kifaru. I have a Kifaru 0 degree slick bag that is like bomb proof. If I'm doing truck hunting, or if I was going in on a sled somewhere for a deep winter hunt, like somewhere where I'm not backpacking, because the bag actually weighs close to 4.5 pounds, that 0 degree slick bag is an absolute tank. So I would say if you're looking for something lighter weight, look at one of the Enlightened Equipment options. If you're looking for something a little heavier duty, go with the Kifaru. Up next, crampons, ice axe, and rope of choice. So let me pull up exactly what I use. So here is the ice axe I use, and I actually take 2 of these. This is the Petzl Ride ice axe. They're kind of mini ice axes. They fit on the back of my pack. I'm going back and forth whether I even bring it this year. I've brought these on 3 hunts and I've never used it to climb anything significant, especially since I do solo winter hunts. I think it's much more important. Again, with the sterilization conversation we just had, you can say to yourself, what's the piece of equipment I need to use so that I can do anything I want and go anywhere I want? Or what is a more reasonable course of action that would still get the job done, but would limit the extraneous gear that I need? And I'm considering not even taking this year. Now, the crampons I use, I believe, are called Sabertooth by Black Diamond. Yeah, here they are. So these are the Sabertooth crampons. Now, if you're going to really commit to deep winter hunting, I strongly recommend a fully crampon compatible boot. And that means you have a heel welt and a toe welt. And these are additional pieces of like rubber that stick out. They're like little lips that come out from the heel and they come out from the toe. I wonder if they have a picture of a boot in this. No, they don't. Basically, your boot fits in here in this little metal piece at the front, and another metal one at the back is what clamps down over those heel welts. And they'll be called fully crampon compatible. So if you need a boot that's fully crampon compatible to get away with the crampon like this, but they're sturdier, they stay on stronger, they're easier to put on. So I recommend if you're going to go deep and you're going to go hardcore winter hunting, get a fully crampon compatible boot and then use a crampon such as these. I've had these ones for 5 years. They work extraordinarily well. I'm very happy with them. Now, as far as rope, I am not a climbing expert. I don't have a background in rock climbing. I don't claim to have a background in rock climbing. And so the one piece of advice I will give you is that if you're taking rope, you're doing it for kind of emergency situations when you're going to need to lower yourself or gear down off of things or hold them in place. So you want a static rope, not a dynamic rope. So most climbing rope has a certain amount of stretch built into it so that when you fall, there's like this kind of springing action. You don't want that for like, basic climbers like myself or what most of other hunters are. So you want like a static gear cord. And that will point you in the right directions. I think I use a Mammoth. Let me see if I can look it up here. A Mammoth 8mm static rope is what I think I remember. Yeah, this is exactly what I use. So let me share my screen again. I'm glad this is working so well. So a Mammoth 8mm nylon static cord. I bought this at MEC. Is it $3 a foot? Or it just says $3, but it doesn't. I think it's probably $3 a foot. And I think I have a 20-foot section of it that I take with me. So that's what I recommend. And if you are an advanced enough of a climber that you're going to be using dynamic rope and like legitimately climbing, then you don't need my recommendation on what rope to use. Best boot you've experienced so far for the long glassing sessions in the snow. So I'm going to provide you 2 recommendations here. If you're on a mountain hunt, I have quite liked the La Sportiva Nichol GTX. They have served me very well. There's several different models that have different levels of insulation and protection. They're very expensive and they're very stiff, but they've served me very well. However, if you're sitting all day on those, you're going to need some type of extraneous protection. What I do sometimes is wrap a puffy jacket around my feet, or I will take my synthetic sleeping bag out of my tent with me for the day, and I will wrap that around my feet, and that will help keep my feet a lot warmer. If you're on a more reasonable hunt, I really like Schnee's pack boots with the felt liners. I was just using these in Alberta, and I just went out for a trip here in the lower mainland, and I was heading up to higher elevations where there was a ton of snow, and I wore them on that hunt as well. And you can still hike some pretty decent stuff. I wouldn't take them on a winter goat hunt, but there's lots of deer hunts that I think those pack boots shine on. And so that's what I would say for the more aggressive terrain. Something like the La Sportiva Nepals or a Scarpa Mont Blanc. And then for less severe terrain, I think a pack boot is a fantastic option. 4-season tent, an absolute must, or can you squeak by with a solid 3? I love this question. Let's actually break down the difference between a 4-season and a 3-season, and also what that means by different manufacturers. Typically, what you're getting with a 4-season tent is stronger poles and either heavier fabric or less ventilation, because that's going to help your tent stay warmer. So if you look at a company like Hilleberg, if you look at the strength of their poles and the strength of the fabric in their 3-season tents, it actually exceeds what most other manufacturers utilize for a 4-season tent. So something like the NIAC, which is advertised as a 3-season tent, is actually beefier than what most individuals would use or what most other companies are utilizing in their 4-season tents. So I think you can definitely squeak by, with some caveats that I'll get into in a moment, with a very beefy 3-season tent. That's why I always say, listen, if you only ever want to own one tent for the rest of your life, and it's just going to be for you, it's the Hilleberg NIAC. It's 4 pounds. You can use it 12 months out of the year. It's going to withstand anything. I ran into a guy on my winter goat hunt that was using one, and it served him just fine. Now, the other thing that I want to comment is winter hunting gear choices are going to depend greatly on your level of experience, not only just winter hunting in general, but with the specific location that you plan to hunt at and your knowledge of that location. I have hunted in a specific area multiple times in a row now. Next time I go back in there, I know where I'm camping. I know what snowfalls are like. I know what the wind is like on this drainage. I've spent over 20 days, 3 different years in this drainage. I know what to expect. Obviously, there could always be some surprises, but I'm very comfortable in that area, and I'm very comfortable deep winter hunting, which means I can take more risks with my gear. I shouldn't even say that I can take more risks. I can say that I can make decisions that allow more flexibility in my gear system without creating any more risk, because I have a greater certainty about the circumstances in which I'm going to find myself. I am considering using a teepee for my next winter goat hunt. There's a couple that I'm particularly interested in, and some that I still need to test out, but there's a lot of pros and cons. However, a lot of drawbacks too. I've always advocated for a freestanding tent for winter conditions, but I'm starting to kind of not change my mind, but I'm starting to become more open to other options that are not freestanding. So obviously I will do a lot of testing, and I will keep you guys in the loop with what my final decision is. But you can save a ton of weight. You can create a lot more space. Winter hunts are tough. Sometimes you're dealing with as little of 8 hours of daylight a day. You can be stuck in the tent for 12 to 16 hours in a stretch. And being in one of those super cramped, hyper minimalist 1P 4-season shelters just really starts to mess with your mind. And having a teepee with some more room where you could do your cooking in there and all the rest of it, there's a lot of upsides. So I'm seriously considering that for my next winter hunt. All right, what do we got next? At what point, if ever, would you switch from a canister stove to a liquid fuel stove? So I'm doing that for my next winter goat hunt as well. I had been using the MSR reactor. The MSR reactor will work incredibly well all the way down to -30, 35 Celsius which is close to minus 30 Fahrenheit. I have personal experience with that. Never had a problem getting it lit or boiling water with it at those low temperatures. However, you are only going to be able to access about 60% of your fuel, which means you need to take almost twice as much fuel as you need. And if you're going to be melting snow for water, that already increases the amount of fuel that you're going to need. So you end up carrying a metric shit ton of fuel, which kind of erases the weight benefit of taking a kind of canister system as opposed to a solid fuel stove. So I am moving over. Let me see if I can bring this up. I want to say it's called, yeah, here it is. This is the one that I bought and that I will be using on my next winter hunt. This is the XGK EX stove from FSR. So it's a multi-fuel system, so you can burn diesel, kerosene, white gas, alcohol, any flammable liquid you want. Now, there's a lot of kind of maintenance with one of these stoves. It creates a lot of creosote. I do not recommend it for a daily stove. However, if you're looking for like apocalypse, end of the world, something that's going to last you forever and be able to use in any single environment with any single fuel, this is your Huckleberry, the MSR XGK EX stove. And then you need to buy a titanium pot to go along with it. But this is the one. And then you need some fuel bottles. I have that whole system, and that's what I'll be using on my next winter goat hunt. So the question was, though, when would you switch over? I would say if you were going to be reliably in temperatures that are lower than 7 to 10 degrees below 0 Celsius. So let's just say if it's going to be colder than minus 10 for the majority of your hunt, which would be about 15 degrees Fahrenheit, I would consider taking a solid fuel stove, unless you have a good supply of water and you're really only going to be boiling for, coffee and your evening meal. Then you could take a little, you could get away with a canister stove. But even then, if it's going to be that cold, I like to do things like bring a cup of soup and chop up pepperoni and put it in there, or have a hot chocolate before bed. Like, I actually end up using my stove a lot more on winter hunts, partially for the psychological break. I enjoy some warm food and liquids, and the warm liquid helps me sleep better at night, kind of brings up my resting core temperature before I get into bed, and I find I have a better night's sleep. So let's just say, yeah, if it's going to reliably be less than minus 10 Celsius or 15 degrees Fahrenheit, I think a solid fuel stove is probably a more reasonable choice. That being said, if you're only doing like a one-off hunt, I don't think you need to go buy a new stove. You can get by with something like, now I'm going to say the reactor specifically, not any canister systems, because the pressure regulator on the reactor and on MSR stoves is much superior. And so you're going to get a better wintertime stove than out of like a typical jet boil. Balance between not sweating when moving and freezing while glassing. Best layers. So I noticed there was another question about this later on, but I'm getting into it now. You should always start off cold when you're hiking. If you're leaving camp in the morning and you're comfortable, when you start to hike, you're going to be sweating within 10 minutes. And then it's like, oh, you're not going to want to stop and take off your pack and remove layers and put them back in. So my general rule of thumb is always leave camp cold. And that way, after you've been hiking for the next 15 or 20 minutes, it will bring your core temperature up to the point where you are comfortable, but not so hot that you start sweating. So on a winter hunt, that would typically mean for me a base layer and an active insulation layer. So something like the Stone Glacier Avro synthetic hoodie paired with the Sitka ambient hoodie in like minus 15 or 20 Celsius. It's going to feel cold at first, but as soon as you've been moving for 10 or 20 minutes, you are going to warm up. The next thing I'm going to recommend is putting on your static insulation as soon as you get to where you're going to stop. A lot of people get there and they'll be sweaty and they'll think I should leave off my static insulation so my sweat has a chance to evaporate and I don't trap all that moisture in there. The problem is your layering system utilizes your own body heat in order to forcefully evacuate the moisture from your system. And if you cool down before putting on that static insulation, it's going to take a long time for you to warm back up enough to start to push that moisture through the layers. So I know it's somewhat counterintuitive, but the moment you get to your glassing knob, throw on all your insulation. Put on your toque, put on your beefy gloves, put on your static insulation, maybe even a raincoat after that to trap some more of that heat in there, and then sit down and glass. Then that heat will force that moisture out of your systems. You'll dry out, your gear will dry out, and you'll be less likely to get the kind of cold sweats that you will if you sit there without your puffy and cool down before putting it on. So that's my recommendation in that regard. So somebody just said, can't get an MSR reactor due to recall. Winter stove options, also condensation tips for below minus 10 degrees Celsius. The reactor is the only stove I would trust for below minus 10. I would look at a solid fuel stove if you're going to reliably be in temperatures that cold. And I would look at the XGK that I just recommended. Condensation tips. I'm going to give a couple non-intuitive tips. If you're using your tent and your sleep system to dry out at night, you are going to have condensation issues. Now, if is there any way to get the wind blowing through your tent, that's going to minimize your condensation issues greatly, but it's also going to cool down your tent. So you kind of have to play that against each other. The warmer your tent is, the less well you are going to evacuate condensation, just the way it is. So here's 2 tips to manage that condensation. Tip number 1, have a little blue kitchen sponge or one of those yellow and green kitchen sponges in your tent. When you wake up in the morning and your tent is still warm, you're going to see condensation all over the walls. Wipe it all off, squeegee it out onto the ground, and that is going to keep the net amount of moisture within your tent at a lower level for the rest of your trip, assuming you're not moving your tent every single day. Another tip, when you get back to your tent, before you get in your tent, typically on these cold hunts, I will look inside and there's ice crystals all over the inside of the tent from the leftover moisture from when I was in there last. As soon as you get in there and your body heat starts to heat up the tent, all those ice crystals turn to liquid and they'll start to drip on you and all your stuff. So what I actually do is I will reach inside the tent with a credit card or I'm trying to think of what else. Anything that's got not a sharp edge, but a firm edge on it. And I will actually scrape all those ice crystals off the wall and then gather them up in the bottom of the tent and then kind of shoot them out the front door. This is the same thing as using the sponge. What you're trying to do, you're not impacting the tent's ability to evacuate condensation, but you are lowering the amount of moisture that is inside the tent because several factors increase the amount of condensation in your tent. For starters, just your breath. There's nothing you're ever going to do about it, but you're going to exhale a certain amount of moisture. And if that moisture doesn't have anywhere to go, it is going to condensate on the inside of your tent. Second, the amount of moisture in your gear. If you come back soaking wet from hiking around in the sleet all day, there's nothing you're going to do. Your tent's going to get soaking wet as your sleep system evacuates that moisture and it kind of collects on the walls of the tent. And thirdly, the amount of ambient moisture inside your tent. And that's why the kitchen sponge and the credit card idea to keep that ambient moisture as low as possible so that way you can breathe, to a reasonable amount and you can bring in a certain amount of moisture and kind of keep that condensation at a tolerable level. Kuyu's new glassing booties. Haven't looked at them. I will need to check them out. Best puppy gear for winter hunts. Best high warmth to dexterity gloves. I really like the Stone Glacier Grumman puffy jacket. For warmth to weight, I think it's the best puffy on the market that I've run yet. What I also take on my deep winter hunts is a discontinued product from Sitka called, I think it's the Sitka Windstopper Down Hoodie. It used to be called, I think it was like the WD or the DW. It had like a 2-letter acronym, and it's like a sleeping bag of a puffy. The thing weighs, I don't even know, might be 2 pounds or something. It's crazy. But if you are going to be in like minus 20 to minus 30 Celsius for a week straight, you need something that is a level past where the Stone Glacier Grumman is going to take you, because that's not going to keep you warm enough if you're glassing for 3 to 4 hours straight. And so I love that. It's discontinued now. I guess I'm going to have to start to look at alternate solutions so that I can recommend something that people can actually buy. But those are my 2 recommendations. And best high warmth to dexterity gloves. If we're talking gloves and not mitts, I really recommend the Sitka Stormfront. They're a 3-in-1 glove, so they come with like a fleece liner and a Gore-Tex shell, so you can use them interchangeably. And what that means is I can bring several different liners. Like I can bring a merino liner, I can bring a fleece liner, and as things get wetted out, I can still use the Gore-Tex shell and swap out the liner glove I'm using. Also, based on the level of dexterity I require, I can change the liner. So if I, am doing a bunch of digiscoping and I need to be able to use my phone while I'm glassing, I will wear these really thin merino liners. Let me actually find these, because they are some of the best gloves I have ever used. Yeah, here they are right here. So this is a merino liner glove from MEC. I'm sure REI has a very similar product. They're $20. They have these kind of black fingertips on them, so you can still use your smartphone. It is shocking how warm these keep my hands. I can't close out of this for some reason. Anyways, highly recommend these. You think the wind would cut right through them, and they don't. But if I'm doing something where I require dexterity, I will wear these inside my Gore-Tex liner. And then if I am like hiking and I'm just going to be using my trekking poles, or I'm doing any other day-to-day normal stuff, I will use the felt liners that come with the Sitka Stormfront. The toughest part about gloves is that no matter what you do, they're going to get wet in the winter at some point. So the question you need to ask yourself is, how do I keep these gloves dry as long as possible? So for me, that actually means not wearing gloves most of the time and just dealing with cold hands, because then when I stop and need to warm up my hands, I dry off my hands, then use my gloves, keeping them dry. You don't want to use your gloves for 6 hours while you're hiking and trekking poles through like sleety snow. And then when you stop, your hands inside your gloves are soaking wet. I see people do this with base layers. They'll take multiple base layers, and as soon as they stop, they take the wet base layer off and put on a new base layer. And in the wintertime, that shit don't fly, because you're not going to be able to dry anything out. I never plan on having fire to dry things out on deep winter hunts, primarily because they're too hard to start based on a lot of the areas where I winter hunt. And because the humidity level is so high, even if you start a fire, you're not going to actually dry some stuff out. You're going to warm it up a little bit. But as soon as it cools down, none of that moisture is actually going to leave it, because you actually need kind of dry, windy air to dry most things out. A fire isn't going to cut it. And so I try and think like I have no way to dry my gear out other than my body heat. So how do I use that to manage my gear choices? And so even when it's minus 20, we'll typically hike around in trekking poles with bare hands, because as long as they're not wet, my skin can actually tolerate quite a lot of cold. And then as soon as I need to take a break, I put my gloves on, and that keeps the gloves dry and allows me to use them more tactically, when I need them instead of all the time. These are good questions, guys. I gotta say. How to run wood stove efficiently for a long winter night. So if I'm truck hunting or fly-in hunting or horseback hunting, anything where I'm able to take a lot of gear in, I use those like pre-packaged long runtime logs that are made of like compressed wood pellets or whatever. And I chop those up into like 3 or 4 sections, and a section will burn for 2 to 4 hours. And then I just keep feeding those sections in, wake up every 2 to 4 hours, put a new chunk of this kind of fake fire log, and it works phenomenally well. I love it. However, if you're in the backcountry, that's not an option. And so I think here the answer really boils down to preparing your wood supply with the right size wood. You don't want to be waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and putting on your kindling in your stove, because you're going to go to bed and 20 minutes later, it's going to be gone. And so having some hardwood, having some bigger pieces, it's never going to be perfect. The main drawback of ultralight backcountry stoves is that they are not particularly airtight. And this is a function of how they're built. They're built with small sheets of titanium that are barely held together. So there's always going to be air leaking in there. So you want to try and get as little air as possible going in there so that the wood burns for as long as possible. But the best you're going to get with normal wood is like hour-ish burn time at best. And so you're still going to be waking up 3 or 4 times during the night to kind of feed wood in there. And you might even be relighting it every time. And that's where I would say bringing a large amount of fire starter, like some trioxane tablets or, other kind of pre-made fire starter, so that you don't have to mess around with like paper and kindling every single time you want to get the fire going, is going to help your case quite a bit. Up next, talk about layering in -10 to +5 temperatures. All right, I don't think there's a fundamental difference in your layering choices in this particular range as there is in any other range. And let's call these like shoulder ranges. Because I think if you're reliably hot or reliably super cold, it does get a little bit easier to do this. But I think you just need to have a good system developed. And again, let's go back to the basics. You need some kind of base layer, some type of active insulation, and some type of static insulation. And then you need some type of moisture protection. And I think your moisture protection also increases the R value of any of your insulation layers as well. So I think this is more a function of actively managing your layering system than it is of having a fundamentally different layering system. And what that means is like I talked about earlier, starting out cold and being okay with that. And if you do start to get sweaty, like right away, take 5 minutes, stop, reorganize yourself. One of the things I will say is that in these type of temperatures, I opt for a heavier base layer. I normally like a hyper light base layer, something like the Sitka Core Lightweight Hoodie or the Kuiu Tiburon Hybrid. If I'm going to be in cold temperatures, late season, I'll use something like the Stone Glacier Avro because it kind of doubles up a bit. It's a next to skin base layer, but it still provides a certain amount of protection. On top of that, like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to wear something like the Ambient, and then I'm going to have either the Stone Glacier Grumman or the Sitka Windstopper hoodie that goes on top of that. And I'm just going to be more aggressive about when and how often I change layers in order to stay effective in a given temperature range. I'm also going to be more cognizant of moisture. Like I would be more likely, instead of putting on my Ambient hoodie, if I'm going to be in snow and it's like that border where like as the snow falls on me, it melts, I'm probably going to do something like run my base layer and then my rain layer and not use any dynamic insulation whatsoever, because I'd rather be a little bit cold inside my rain jacket, but keep the inside of my rain jacket dry. Whereas if you were to do something like your Stone Glacier Avro hoodie, your Sitka Ambient hoodie, and then your rain layer, then put a 70-pound pack on and start to hike through the snow, you're going to sweat out pretty fast. And then that moisture is going to get on the inside of your rain jacket. The whole system is going to kind of get wetted out. So if you take that dynamic insulation layer out of there and just go base layer, rain layer, you might feel a little bit more cold, but you're going to stay significantly drier. So that's how I would approach that particular temperature rain. Do you carry a candle to heat your isobutane canisters? I do not. I'm not even, I guess that is an option. I get a little bit nervous about holding a flame up to my isobutane canisters. And I also, like when you're in minus 30 Celsius, I don't think you're going to realistically heat up a canister with a candle. I just don't think it's going to happen. And even if you do, 1 minute after you put that canister back down in the snow, it's going to go right back to its baseline temperature. So yeah, not my first line of defense. Heated socks, are they worth it? Already talked about this. I would go heated insoles and some good heated base layer. If somebody's got some recommendations for heated socks, send them over. I'll try them out. Glove system. I run fleece windstopper line soft shell down mitts, Gore-Tex shell mitts. This guy does almost exactly what I do. So I kind of have 3 levels of gloves. My first level is a pair of mechanics gloves. I use them all the time. They take up almost no space. I actually run the winter ones because they're a little bit beefier and they keep your hands a little bit warmer. And these are something I throw in my pack no matter where I'm going, no matter what time of year it is, because there could be like you might need to do stuff like move timber, or you just might want a pair of gloves in your backpack to protect your hand. I've gone up, extremely steep faces before, and I just wanted gloves on so I could grab whatever I wanted to grab, and I didn't have to worry about, thorns and other things poking into my skin. So that's line of defense number 1. Line of defense number 2 is I would call a mid-grade 3-in-1 glove. And that's that Sitka Stormfront. Everybody makes one. Black Diamond makes them. Outdoor Research makes them. You just got to find the ones that fit your hand. And that's going to be some type of fleece liner with some type of Gore-Tex shell. Line of defense number 3 is going to be a deep winter mitt system. Again, I can't remember if they're called the Sitka Blizzards or the Sitka Stormfronts, but they're essentially a synthetic, or you can get down from different companies, mitt that goes inside a Gore-Tex mitt shell. And everybody remembers from being as a kid, mitts are much warmer than gloves because it keeps your fingers together, but you have almost zero dexterity. The other reason I like all these 3-in-1 systems is that I can use my fleece gloves inside my Gore-Tex mitt if I want to kind of create a hybrid of those 2 systems. But if I'm going on a deep winter hunt, I'm going to bring all of those, except I'm probably going to leave out the mechanics, and I'm going to throw in a pair of those merino liners that I shared earlier, because I can use those on their own. I can put them inside either the Gore-Tex glove shell or the Gore-Tex mitt, and it's just going to create a greater level of versatility throughout my entire system. What is your layering system for your lower half? So I tend to run particularly hot. If we are talking about deep late season, I will typically use either a very heavy duty rain pant over long johns, or last goat hunt, both my last winter goat hunts, I use those Sitka Blizzard bibs. Let me see if I can find those right now. These things are incredible. Yeah, Blizzard Aero Light bib pants. Listen, these are expensive as shit. $750 US. So I recognize not a realistic option for everybody. But if you want to talk winter goat hunt, this is far and away the best pant I've ever worn in my life. I would like to give the Stone Glacier M7 line a try because they're like an insulated rain pant, and I think they might provide a similar experience to these. And I was just wearing boxers inside these. They're like fleece lined, insulated, They have added protection through the seat. Phenomenal, but crazy expensive. If you don't own these and you have some heavy duty rain pants, I used to use the Sitka Stormfront rain pants, but those are discontinued now. So something like the heavier line from Kuiu, and I would wear long johns on inside of that. I don't think you need the same level of insulation on your lower half as you do on your upper half, because it doesn't contribute as much to your overall core temperature. And I just find your lower body has better natural temperature protection. Like, it doesn't need to stay, it doesn't feel the cold as much as your core does. So that's what my lower system layering looks like. A tent that can be run in early September, but also stretched out to run in November temps. I really like the Sea to Summit Telos TR2. I'm just about to get an early version of the new MSR Hubba Hubba LT that might fit into that category. Obviously, the Hilleberg NEAC shines for this application. Lots of tents will fit into this application. Best long johns. Let me pull those up as well. So far, my favorite long johns I have used are the Arc'teryx Modus AR. And let me share these guys right here. Oh, it looks like, well, these ones are no longer available, but I'm sure that Arc'teryx still has the Modus line. Maybe they don't have the Modus line. Let me have a quick look here. Yeah, it does not look like so they have. That's what's so frustrating about trying to recommend gear, is that just as I find things that work for me and then take the time to put them through adequate testing, these companies don't make them anymore, and they make something that's kind of similar but a little different. And I get it. It helps sell gear, but it makes it very challenging to recommend gear. But Arc'teryx, in my opinion, everything that they make is outstanding quality. Best boots for warmth, going to go back to the Schnee's pack boots. If it's crazy cold and you're going to be doing something like those bunny boots, those Alaska bunny boots, or like Baffin Island, I have very good luck with Baffin boots when I used to do winter layout. But those are legit warm boots. Down versus synthetic. Oh, listen, man, it is an exercise in compromise. All right. Down is going to be lighter and it's going to be warmer. Synthetic is going to give you better moisture protection. And so you need to ask yourself in this situation, what's more important, the weight or the moderating your risk, mediating your risk? On a hunt like a winter goat hunt, I play these things off of each other. Like lots of times, if I'm bringing a synthetic sleep system, I'll let my puffy layers be down, because at least they might get wet during the day, but when I get back at night, I can dry them out in my sleep system by wearing them as I sleep. If I wanted to save weight and go with a down sleep system, I would probably want to take at least one synthetic puffy layer, because I need to recognize that I might wet my sleep system out at some point and not have the ability to use my sleep system to dry my gear out. I'm going to get into this later in another question when we start talking about pairing things. And this next question kind of alludes to this, but are you going for the 50-degree synthetic quilt? The answer is yes, I am. So I'm now utilizing a deep winter slip system where I take a 20-degree down quilt and I stick it inside of a 50-degree synthetic quilt. Still keeps my entire sleep system bag weight at about 2.5 pounds, but I get to take advantage of the best of both worlds. So you can take advantage of the fact that when you placed down inside of a synthetic shell, as you evaporate moisture, it will travel through the down and it won't condensate until it gets to the exterior of the synthetic because it's not on the surface. So if you just have a down quilt, as you sweat or as you expel moisture through that quilt, it gets to the exterior of the quilt, turns to condensation, drips back into the down, and it wets out the down. If you take that same down and put it inside a synthetic shell, the moisture stays as vapor through the down quilt, through the synthetic quilt, and then when it gets to the exterior of the synthetic quilt, it condensates and stays on the surface and drips back onto the synthetic quilt. But the synthetic quilt can stand up to that type of abuse where the down can't. So by layering a 20-degree quilt into a 50-degree quilt down inside a synthetic, I'm taking advantage of amplifying both of those temperature ratings, and I'm getting the light and the heat retention, the lightness and the heat retention of the down, and the moisture protection of the synthetic. And then I also have my puffy layers to take that up even further. But I'm feeling very comfortable. I can sleep in minus 30 degrees Celsius, minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, no problem, with those two things layered inside of each other with my puffy system to kind of get even a better result. All right, that burned up an hour and I got to go do some stuff. And I'm not even halfway through these questions. So I'm going to hit pause right here. I'm going to go do what I got to do. And then I'm going to come back later because you guys took enough time to ask some really thought-provoking questions. I'm going to make sure and answer every single damn one of them. So to be continued. All right, folks, we're back. I got another hour to wrap this up before I got to go pick my kid up from school. So let's get into this. So I got two hot tent questions back to back. Ever consider hot tent teepees? And what are your thoughts on stoves for backcountry hunts? So this has been a bit of an evolution for me. When I first got into backcountry hunting, Snyder was kind of praising the hot tent. And I thought that was the only way to do it in the backcountry. And I got a Kafaru Megatarp with a Smith, an 18-inch Smith cylinder stove. Did quite a few hunts with that setup. And now I've transitioned completely away from it. And I don't believe in hot tents for backcountry hunts at all. I'm going to give a slight caveat to that. I don't believe in them for solo hunts. I think if I was doing something like a third season Colorado rifle mule deer hunt with two other guys, and we could, split up gear and carry in like a 6 or 8 man teepee with a stove, and we were going to be below tree line in like a somewhat more arid climate where there was lots of firewood and we were expecting snow, I think that could probably be a great system. But the majority of my solo stuff, especially in BC, is either above tree line when I'm sheep or goats, or it's in the northwest coast of BC where it's extremely humid and wet and nothing will burn. And on top of that, I have found that it is more calorically advantageous to just use your sleep system to warm up and dry yourself out. I've talked about this before, but I'll break it down again real quick. I do believe that having fires in general is more psychologically beneficial than physiologically beneficial. I don't think it actually really raises your core temperature for the most part. I mean, obviously having a stove inside the tent would be the exception to that. But even a fire outside, I think, is more about cheering you up than it is about warming you up. And I think by the time you spend all that time and energy gathering wood, getting it started, tending it, doing all that kind of stuff, I think you're better off to have a good synthetic sleep system and just crawl in your bag for 2 hours. It will warm you up. It will dry you out. You're going to rest more. You're going to burn fewer calories. I think from a quantitative perspective, the sleep system approach is better than the fire approach. You got to bring less gear. You got to carry less gear. There's fewer variables to manage. And I think it's just a more successful system. But I do think there's a couple exceptions. One would be the group style hunt that I was just talking about. And number two would be, truck hunting, plane hunting, anything, horseback hunting, anything where you can carry in more gear and not pay a weight penalty, then I start sliding back over to the hot tent teepee style side of the equation because I think it's more beneficial. But for solo backcountry stuff, personally, it doesn't have a place in my arsenal anymore. Leather mitts or down gloves. For backcountry stuff, down all day. Leather's just too heavy and you don't need that type of protection on your hand. But I think if you were riding horses or, a couple other types of hunts that I can think of off the top of my head, leather has its place, but not in the backcountry. Trash bag around sleeping bag for condensation. If you mean this the way I think you mean this, it is going to be counterproductive. The purpose of your sleep system is to expel moisture from your body, not trap it. Because if you lock it in there with a garbage bag, your sleeping bag is going to get wet. I would rather have the condensation on my tent walls than have it on my sleeping bag. And so it's another reason why I don't do the bivy tarp thing. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I guess you can have a breathable bivy. The other reason I don't like the bivy tarp thing is the math just doesn't make sense. By the time I add up the weight of a bivy and a tarp, I'm right where a small 1 to 2 person tent would be, except I got to deal with having rain blow in under the side and pitching a tarp and all the rest of it. And people always say it's faster, but I mean, is it really? It takes me like 45 seconds to put up a tent. So that's a bit of a tangent, but it's something I hear, people, praising all the time is the bivy tarp combo, and I just don't see it personally. Okay. I already talked about gloves. How do you approach keeping your feet warm? This is going to vary drastically depending on the activity level of the hunt. On most of my deep winter hunts, it's hiking. As long as I'm moving, my feet stay warm. And I did a YouTube short on this a couple years ago, and I talked about earlier in the podcast. I will use my puffy layer or my sleeping bag and wrap it around my boots if I need to, in order to warm them up. Tips on keeping batteries alive when it gets very cold. I actually have a front pocket in my Arc'teryx long johns that zips closed. And so what I will do is I have spare batteries for my big camera and my GoPro. I don't have a spare battery for my Insta360 camera, but it seems to be much more impervious to cold than the other two. But I will keep spare batteries for each of those systems in that pocket. So I can literally unzip the kind of hip zippers, or it depends what pants I'm wearing. But if I'm wearing the Blizzard pants, they have side zips. I open that, I reach in from the side, open my little pocket in my long johns, put my batteries in there, keeps them super warm and toasty. When I want to film something, I take them out, swap them into the cameras, and then film with them until the camera freezes. And then once the camera won't turn on anymore, I swap the batteries. I put the ones in the camera system into my long johns, and I put the ones in the long johns into my camera system. Best active thermal insulating layer has to be the Ambient from Sitka. If anybody else has introduced anything in the last year or two, I would love to go take a look at it, but nothing beats my Ambient hoodie for an active insulation layer. I've never been able to hike so well while wearing something and not get sweated out, and yet still have it keep my temperature moderated. It's one of the best pieces of gear I've ever owned. Keep boots from freezing, drying boots, etc. Okay, let's talk about drying boots first and then keeping them from freezing second, because I believe one leads to the other. A wet boot freezes much faster than a dry boot. Never take your boots off until the very end of the day. The best way to dry your boots out are keeping them on your feet and letting your body temperature force the moisture out of the boot. So this is something I learned tree planting, because I would get wet boots every day and everybody else would take them off and try and dry them out in the dry bus. and nobody's would ever really get dry. And if I just wore mine until 10 or 11 o'clock at night when I went to bed, they would be dry every morning when I went to put them back on. So wear your boots as long as possible. Also, on these longer wet winter hunts, I will bring at least one spare pair of socks, because what I have found is that your sock can absorb a lot of moisture outside of your boot. But if you're putting wet socks inside wet boots, especially in cold conditions, you're going to be very hard pressed to get that moisture out of those boots. And then what I will do is I will dry the socks out in my sleep system at night. Typically, they dry out best when I'm on my feet. I've tried just throwing wet socks in the bottom of a sleeping bag before, and the bottom line is it just doesn't do very much. They're always still wet in the morning. Well, what I will do is wear the socks, wake up in the middle of the night, they're dry, I'll take them off. If I have a second wet pair, I will put them back on. And this is what people don't understand. Like, people are like, oh, I don't like the wet socks on my, and it's like, this is why I want to have a fire. And it's like, if you are willing to undergo a little bit of discomfort, you can have a such more efficient system for sleeping and drying out your stuff. Like, you are literally the perfect clothes dryer. Like, your body, when surrounded with a good layer of synthetic insulation, is perfectly designed to dry out all your gear. And so a lot of the answers to these questions just boil down to letting your body do what it does best: generate heat and expel moisture. Also, be a little more cognizant than normal about where you're walking. Like, try not to get any soakers. There's not much you can do about snow. It's going to get your feet wet no matter what. And then really water treat your boots incredibly well. Cat is back. He's trying to crawl underneath my computer monitor right now. Oh, and he just fell off the back of the desk like a retard. Anyways, water treat your boots particularly well. I always do it right before I leave, and I'll normally do 2 layers. I'll put them on the boot dryer to heat them up, or I'll use a hair dryer. When they're nice and warm, I will apply my leather treatment. I'll let them completely dry out, probably overnight, leaving them on the boot dryer. And then the very next day, I'll heat them back up and put a second layer in there. So if we use all of those tips in order to try and keep our feet dry, how then, when they do get a little bit wet and they freeze overnight, what do we do? I'm sure you can guess where I'm going to go with this. You're going to use your feet to thaw out your boots in the morning. However, we're going to do a couple things first. Number one, you're going to undo the laces as far as you can, and you're going to pull the tongue out. You're going to open the sides of the boots, and you're going to open the entryway of that boot as wide as humanly possible. Because here is what's going to happen if you don't. If you leave that opening small, it's going to freeze like that, and you're not even going to be able to get your foot in it in the morning. So if you open it wide up, then at least if it freezes, you can still get your foot inside. You can wear them around camp unlaced for half an hour while you make your coffee, have your breakfast. That'll warm them up enough. It'll get the leather flexible enough, and then you can tie them up and thaw them out the rest of the way. But another couple tips: keep your boots inside your tent at night. A lot of people leave them in the vestibule. The vestibule is way colder. I'm going to say by like 10 or 12 degrees, way colder than the inside of the tent. I mean, I'll have water that doesn't freeze inside the tent and does freeze outside the tent. So keep them inside the tent with you. If you can, up by your head where it's going to be the warmest part of the tent. You can also leave your Nalgene bottle in your boots overnight. That'll stop some of the airflow, and it will also keep the boots open nice and wide. And then a lot of people talk about boiling water, pouring in an Nalgene, and putting that in your boots to thaw it out. I'm sure that would work. I've never personally done it. Again, I think if you leave them open as wide as possible, that's going to allow you to get your foot in there, and then that's what's going to thaw them out once you get going in the morning. I'm going to touch on a down booty thing here later on as well, but lots of times I will have it I don't like wearing my boots around camp if I'm not going to be leaving for the first hour because my toes will get very cold. And so as long as I can get my foot in the boot and get them laced up, I won't put them on until I'm about to leave. And then when I put them on and start hiking, I really get the temperature of my feet up and it really gets the boots, into a working condition much faster. And then I normally have to stop 10 or 15 minutes down the trail. They're warmed up enough, leather's pliable, and I can tighten them up with the laces. So there's a couple tips, keeping your boots dry, and what do you do when they're freezing? Do you use down socks? I just took mine on their first Sub-Zero overnight money. So what I use, I'm going to look this up again. I believe they're called Mech Expedition. Yeah, here we go. So this is what I use. These are called Mech Expedition Gore-Tex booties. And I'm going to walk through why I think these are better than most of the other ones on the market and what about these I think are necessary so that if you don't buy these ones, you still get what these ones offer. Okay, I like a hard bottom shell on my down booties. They're not quite as comfortable to wear in your sleeping bag, but when you get up to take a leak in the night, the snow doesn't stick to them. And you can get back into the tent and it doesn't wet them out by walking around in the snow. And I also like them to come up over the calf to the bottom of the knee. Now, only the bottom section of this down booty is insulated. The top section that covers your calf is not. But again, I want to be able to wear these around camp. And I don't want snow to fall down inside the booties. So they're kind of serving a twofold purpose to me. I can wear them in my sleeping bag at night if I need to keep my feet warm, but I can also wear them around camp, walking around. So if I get back to camp at night, I want to take my boots off. They're not that wet. I don't mind taking them off. I can kind of like relax a little bit in camp and have these nice kind of camp boots as well as something that I can sleep in. So this is what I like when it comes to down booties. All right, let's see what we got next. I've got the Seek Outside stove. Like it, but I haven't tried anything else. Have you? I also have the Seek Outside stove. I like it a great deal. I don't think there's a big difference between most of the stoves. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Experimented with any dry socks? ? Schnee's wet out eventually, even after fresh oil. I have no idea what this means. Fresh oil? And dry socks. Somebody please drop me a comment if you know what this guy's talking about. Insulated boots for mountain hunts, i.e. goats or sheep. Alberta has some November seasons. You can get some insulated hikers. The granites from Schnee's I can highly recommend. I know there's some version of the La Sportive Nepal's. There's some insulation in there, but it doesn't actually mention on the site how much insulation they have. And then you've always got pack boots. Like, I think pack boots are miraculous for situations where you're not in kind of severely steep terrain. They stay drier than hiking boots. They'll keep your feet warmer than hiking boots. They're more comfortable than hiking boots. I love my pack boots. I'm sure there's more insulated hikers out there. I know Scarpa has some that are really good, but those are the ones that I can think of right off the top of my head. What pants, base layer bottoms do you run for late season hunts? So right now, I'm running the Stone Glacier de Havilland Light. They're a little bit heavier than my Sitka Ascent pants that I like to run during the rest of the season. I used to run the Sitka Mountain Pant for late season. I like that pant a lot, but I lost a bunch of weight after bodybuilding and I tried to put those pants on and I was swimming inside them. And then obviously if it gets real late season, I run those Sitka Blizzard ones. Down puffy insulator system with a synthetic sleep system. Do you think it will manage moisture? I already talked about this earlier, and yes, 1000% it will manage moisture. So like I was telling you before, if you're going to put your down sleeping bag inside your synthetic sleeping bag, the same concept holds true if you get in a synthetic sleeping bag wearing down components. And that's why I think the down or synthetic question is not an either or, but a yes and. Like, I think you're better off mixing the benefits of both technologies as opposed to limiting yourself to one or the other. Use case for heated gloves, boots versus classic hand and foot warmers, like those little powdery ones that you shake up. So here's the drawback of those hot hands. They require air to work. So I tried to use those in my boots on late November whitetail hunt in Alberta, where it was bone-chillingly cold. And about half an hour after I put them in my boots, they would just stop working. And then I got home later that day, took them out, put them on the dresser in the room I was staying in. But an hour and a half later, I came back in my room and I went to pick them up and move them, and I almost burnt my hand. They were so hot. So without air, they just go dormant. And the problem is, when you want to put them under your feet, there's no air circulating down there. And so I think for gloves, where you're taking your hands in and out of your gloves all day, or what I do is I put one of the hot hands in my front muff pocket of my Sitka Fanatic jacket. And then every time I reach my hands in, I kind of play with it a little bit and it keeps my hands warm. I think it can be very good for gloves. For feet, they just don't work for me. And that's why I've transitioned to those heated insoles. I think it's a much more successful tactic. Would I rather be comfortably cold, slightly underdressed, or sweating when hiking for 10 minutes? I love how the same concepts keep coming up. It's good though. It means there's like these principles that everyone is wondering about. And these are universal principles. Always be uncomfortably cold when you start. And he says comfortably cold. I want to push it a little further and say, be uncomfortably cold. I want you to want to get your ass on the trail. Like, you should not be comfortable when you start hiking. You should be cold. And then 10 to 20 minutes into that hike, you will warm up and you won't sweat through your gear nearly as much. Best 0-degree synthetic bag, Kafaru slick bag. Listen, if you're using a 0-degree synthetic bag, they are extremely heavy. So unless you are on some type of transported hunt, truck, sled, horse, plane, unless it's like -40, I think you can get away with a -20 bag and then using your puffies. Like, I have slept in -25-degree weather in a -20-degree synthetic bag with a liner, a reactor liner from Sea to Summit, and my puffy stuff, and I had to take my puffy stuff off. That's the other thing you can add to a 20-degree synthetic bag, is adding a sleeping bag liner. The reactor series from Sea to Summit is fantastic. Easily adds another 10 to 15 degrees of warmth rating. Favorite base layers and best down pant. So right now, the Stone Glacier Avro synthetic hoodie has completely replaced the Sitka Core Light hoodie as my favorite base layer, my all-purpose favorite base layer. For early season, I would go the Kuiu Tiburon Hybrid. It's a bit of a weird fit. I'm going to have a review on it shortly. It is not your typical kind of skin-tight, stretchy base layer, but I used it for elk and goat this year, and I was incredibly impressed with it. So, but if I was only going to own one, I would go the Stone Glacier Avro synthetic hoodie. It is fantastic. For bottoms, I'm still Lululemon boxers. They're not lasting as long as the old ones, but I can't find anything else that fits as well, breathes as well, inhibits motion as well. Like, they're just perfect. So they're still my go-tos. I tried some from Dang Soft, the Duluth Trading Company, and they're okay, but they're not as good as the Lulus. And then, what was the second part? Best down pant. Here's the thing. I've probably worn down pants for a sum total of 18 minutes in my entire life, and I take them on almost every hunt. I had the Stone Glacier Grumman's, and now I have the Sitka 3/4 length down pants. I don't think it really matters that much. If you're going to buy one pair, I'd probably buy the Stone Glacier Grumman's. Best hunting gloves and mitts. We already talked about that. And finally, the last one, not a gear question, but have you ever experimented with Wim Hof breathing to help thermoregulation? I have not. I got a couple buddies who are pretty deep into it and have done some of the seminars. Wim himself is an absolute genetic freak. I have no kind of explanation whatsoever for what he is physically capable of. So there's got to be something to it. Anyways, I have not. I hate cold water, and so I am not getting in cold water voluntarily and doing some bullshit breathing exercise. I get it. I'm sure I'd be tougher if I cold plunged and all the rest of it, but I just don't really care. I don't like it, so I'm not doing it. Maybe that will change at some point during the future, but it would be an interesting thing to experiment with for sure. If you have, and you have some results you want to share, I'd love to hear about them. All right, there you have it. That's a complete Q&A. A quick reminder again about the housekeeping. Prime RVX giveaway on YouTube. Just join Mindful Reviews before December 15th, mindful-reviews.com. Frontiersman Vulpes giveaway. Go to YouTube, watch that video, share, like, comment on social media, both Instagram and YouTube, for a chance to win that knife. And Mindful Hunter Outfitting is live. So Archery Alberta mule deer hunts and spring black bear any weapon hunts in BC. I would love to help you craft your next Canadian hunting adventure. And I just put up my compact spotting scope review on YouTube. It's getting a lot of really great feedback. I know you guys have been waiting for that one for a while. Ton more reviews. I probably got 15 or 20 reviews I'm trying to crank out before Christmas. So lots of content coming down the pipe. If you could share this content in any way possible, I would love for you to leave a positive review on your podcast platform of choice. That would really help kind of crank this up in the algorithm. And as always, thank you for tuning in.